Welcome back to New Hope Kids and to the big story of the Bible. Here's where we are so far. God made a good world and people in his image, and they were very good. But people turned their own way. They trusted the snake and themselves, and sin and death entered the world. But God promised that one day a child of Eve would come and defeat sin and death forever. But things just got worse and worse and worse. Things got so bad, and God was so sad for all the badness that was happening. He flooded the earth and washed away the badness. But he saved Noah and his family and made a covenant with them to never flood the world again. And he told them to fulfill Adam and Eve's mission, to fill the whole world and keep making it awesome. But Noah and his family were still infected with the snake and the sin, and they turned to their own way. But God had a plan. He picked one of Noah's family and called him to follow him and launch his rescue mission. Let's review what happened to his family.
We're walking through the book of Genesis, which is made up of these two main parts.
And the first part begins in the garden, where we watch humanity spiral downward in self-destruction, and it ends in the Tower of Babel, where a rebellious humanity is scattered by God.
Then the second part of Genesis zooms in and focuses on just one family.
And right in the middle is this story that links the two parts of Genesis together and helps us understand what the whole book is all about.
So how do we get from the Tower of Babel to the story here in the middle?
Well, after the scattering at Babel, there's this genealogy, and it follows one of the tribes all the way down to this one guy named Abram.
You probably know him as Abraham.
And God starts making all these promises to Abraham, like he's going to bless him and give him a ton of kids. And he says that through him and his family, all the nations of the earth are now going to find God's blessing. So basically, God is trying to restore humanity back to the goodness of the garden and to his original intentions for the world. So it's like his rescue plan for humanity. And that's why the whole second half of Genesis is about this one family. And so you have Abraham, and then he has his son Isaac, who has Jacob, and then Jacob has 12 sons. And to each generation, God renews his promise to bless them and all nations through them.
This time, the second half of Genesis is called the time of the what? Were these patriarchs really good people? Is that why God chose them? No, each one of them was seriously flawed, just like me and you. But God made a special promise with Abraham and renewed it with his son and his grandson. What's the word for that kind of special promise? Covenant. When we first read about Noah, he's called a righteous man, and we think maybe he's the snake crusher, but he turned out to still be infected by sin just as much as Adam. And we think maybe Abraham's the snake crusher. He's called a friend of God and does trust him, but as you read more in Genesis, you find out it's not really him either. He's not faithful to his covenant with God, and his kids aren't. But God still blesses him. What were the three things God promised Abraham? God promised Abraham to give him a son and to make his grandsons and grandsons into a whole nation. He promised to give them their own land, and he promised to bless the whole world through his family. God begins to fulfill the first part to Abraham 25 years after he first makes his promise. How old was Abraham when his promised son was finally born, and what was his name? He was 100, and the name of his son was Isaac. Then Isaac had twins named what and what? Jacob and Esau. And Jacob, well, he had 12 sons.
So Jacob goes on from there to have 12 sons, big family. But Jacob loves his 11th son, Joseph, way more than all the others. And so he gives him the special Technicolor dream coat. And his brothers, because of this, come to hate him.
So much so that they plan on killing him.
But they don't. They instead just sell him as a slave down in Egypt.
Now, while in Egypt, through this crazy series of events, Joseph goes from being in a prison cell to becoming the second in command there.
And so later on, the whole Middle East falls into this food shortage. And Joseph's brothers, they come down to Egypt looking for food. And then when they get there, who should they find as the ruler of the whole land?
It's Joseph, that guy they sold into slavery. But he actually saves them from starving to death.
And so here you have it. These are the great-grandchildren of Abraham who have done this heinous act to their brother, but God has transformed their evil into something good.
And that's exactly what Joseph says here in the last paragraph of the entire book. He says, you guys planned all of this for evil, but God planned it for good, to save people's lives.
Now, these words, they conclude the book because they actually summarize the message of the whole story so far. Humans keep choosing evil, and we are thinking they're screwing up God's plan, but he keeps turning their evil back into good. And somehow, he's going to use this family to restore humanity back to the garden.
So that's the book of Genesis.
And that's how Genesis ends. And today, we get to begin the second book of the Bible, Exodus. Do you remember what the word Genesis means? It means beginning. Do you know what the word Exodus means? It means to exit or to leave. It's the story of some people leaving. Do you know who is leaving where? Jacob's family had moved out of the promised land and into Egypt. They had grown into a huge nation. Ooh, hey, wait, that is the first part of the promise fulfilled. But they were eventually enslaved by Egypt, living horrible lives. But God had a plan.
This is Moses, who was an Israelite born in Egypt in a time when Israelite boys were not supposed to live.
Wait, huh?
Moses, however, grew up in the palace of the Pharaoh, the very man who was enslaving the Israelite people. When Moses grew up, he made a big mistake.
Uh-oh.
So Moses ran away from Egypt
Wow!
to the land of Midian. After many years, an angel of the Lord appeared to Moses and told him to go back to Egypt to free the Israelites. After much protesting, God granted Moses his brother Aaron to speak on his behalf.
Whew.
So Moses went to Egypt.
Here, move there.
And on his way there, he met Aaron, who was ready to do whatever God wanted him to do. The Israelites were slaves to the Egyptians, but God had a special plan for Moses.
Hey, everyone up. Huh?
After rallying God's people to them,
Yeah.
Moses and Aaron went to the Pharaoh.
Ahem.
And said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, has said. Let my people go."
Shit.
And Pharaoh made the Israelites work harder because of this.
Hey, how are you? Huh?
The foremen of the Israelite slaves were angry with Moses and Aaron for causing this trouble.
Huh?
So Moses cried out to God and asked why this was happening. But God said, "You will see what I will do. I am the Lord. I will deliver you from slavery."
Okay. Hey.
Moses told this to the people,
Hey.
but they were so discouraged that they didn't listen to him.
Yeah, whatever.
God told Moses to go to Pharaoh and to do exactly as he said. So Moses and Aaron went to the Pharaoh.
Hey.
God told them to take the staff and throw it down before Pharaoh.
Huh?
Pharaoh was not impressed. He called his wise men and sorcerers, and they did the same thing.
Ooga.
But Aaron's staff swallowed up the sorcerer's staff. Yet Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them,
Shoot.
just as God had said. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the banks of the Nile River and meet Pharaoh."
Hey, Pharaoh. Oh, man.
Moses and Aaron did just as God had said.
Oh.
But again, Pharaoh's magicians did the same miracle, and Pharaoh refused to let God's people go. So God sent 9 more plagues to Egypt to show his power. Even with all the suffering, Pharaoh's heart stayed hard, and he would not let the people go. On the night of the last plague, Pharaoh woke up and heard a great cry in Egypt,
Oh, no.
for there was not a house in Egypt where someone was not dead. Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and told them to be gone with the Israelites. So the Israelites left Egypt immediately and made their way to the Promised Land, taking with them many riches from Egypt, and they took Joseph's bones as they had promised him many years before. But after they had gone, Pharaoh changed his mind and readied his army to take back the Israelites. When the Israelites saw Pharaoh and his armies come, they were terrified. But God made a way for them. Through all of this, the Israelites saw the great power of their God, the one true God, and they put their trust in Moses, his servant.
Wow, maybe Moses is the snake crusher. What do you think? God used him to save his people from Egypt and to show them all his great power. Maybe now the people would trust him and stop trying to go their own way. Is that what happened? No. Here's a little detail that happens later in the book of Numbers. When, spoiler alert, the people are still in the desert and still complaining about water and not trusting God. Moses again brought water from the rock, but this time he didn't do it the way God had told him. He turned to his own way. Moses wasn't the snake crusher. And the people of Israel were about to show that they were definitely not the faithful covenant partners God was calling them to be. Like Abraham, Moses wasn't the snake crusher. But like Abraham, Moses was a special friend of God. God spoke to him in a special way and through him to the whole nation of Israel. And through Moses, God makes a special covenant with them.
So that's Abraham. The next time we see God make a covenant is when Abraham's family grows into the tribe of Israel.
And this covenant is with the whole tribe. God asks them to obey a set of laws, which are these guidelines for living well as a community of God's partners. And if they do this, then God promises to bless them and that they will become a people who then represent him to the rest of humanity.
I'm going to read part of that covenant. Exodus 19. Then Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the descendants, the children of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you out on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if only you obey me fully and keep my commandments, then out of all the nations, you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak, Moses, to the Israelites. So Moses went back and he called all the elders of the people and set before them all the words the Lord had commanded him to speak. And the people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought their answer back to God. God promised that they would be blessed. They would be his special people. And they were to obey him fully and keep his commandments. What did the people say to this? Did they accept his covenant? Yes, they said they did. But do you think they kept it? No. Have you ever done something bad and then you promised your parents you'd never, ever do it again? Did you keep that promise? You've probably made a bunch of those promises. Have you kept all of them? God gave the people the special gift of the law. They were a group of people who'd wandered around in the desert and they'd been slaves for generations and generations. God gave them the laws to help them run their own country when they were going to receive their own land that he'd promised to Abraham. 10 of these laws were and are the most famous and the most important. Maybe you know some of them. Can you name any of the 10 commandments? The first 2 commandments are that they were not to have or worship any other gods than God. Many other countries and cultures at the time worshipped other gods. They served, and they thought there were lots of different gods. They served the god of money, and the god of human love, and the god of having lots of kids, and the gods of being safe in all these different situations, and the gods of knowing lots of stuff, and the gods of luck. And we still do that today. We all still at times put our trust in money or in power or in human love more than we trust in God. We trust the snake instead of God. An idol is a statue or a picture of a god. So if you were worried about money and not having enough, you might put the statue of the god of money and pray to that god to help you. But of course, it couldn't. Last week, we talked about how when people get married, they're making a covenant with each other, promising to be faithful to each other and to only romantically love, to only be in love with that other person forever. The people all responded together, "We will do everything the Lord has said." So Moses brought the answer back to the Lord. That's what they promised. But while Moses was up on the mountain with God, receiving more of his instructions for 40 days, the people did exactly what they promised they wouldn't. Exodus 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long and coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, Moses' brother, and said, "Come and make us a god who will go before us. As for this guy Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." It would be like someone getting married and then the next day leaving that person and going to live with someone else. They had just promised to be God's special people, and right away they break the 2 most important commands.
And what links these 2 apps together is this crucial story. The people of Israel, they're out in the middle of nowhere. They find themselves at the foot of this mountain called Sinai. And here, God's presence comes dramatically down in the form of a violent storm cloud. But then they refuse to go into God's presence because it's still a bit frightening.
And since the people won't go up, Moses goes up to the mountain by himself to meet with God. But God still wants to be with all of his people. And so he says, okay, if the people won't come up here to me, I'll come down off this mountain to be with you all. And that's why he orders Moses to build this elaborate tent as a place where God's presence can be among his people. Now let's back up, because before the tent is finished, there's this super important story. Moses is coming off the mountain with the 10 Commandments and the blueprints in his hands, and he finds Israel breaking the first 2 commands of the covenant.
Don't have any other gods before me, and don't worship idol statues.
Right, and so here we are. Immediately after agreeing to the covenant, they're throwing this ritual party, they're worshiping an idol. And so God says to Moses, you know what, this is not going to work. I should just wipe these people out and start over with you.
But Moses reminds God of his promise to Abraham and pleads with God to spare them, which is a really weird conversation. Why would God need to be reminded of something?
Yeah, it does seem odd, but this dialogue is inviting us into God's experience of grief and pain due to Israel's actions. And he really could walk away. But instead, this God chooses faithfulness to his own promises, even though he knows it's going to cost him.
God chooses to be faithful to his promise, to the covenant he made with Israel, even though the people were already unfaithful to their part of the covenant. And that's the pattern we see throughout the rest of the books of the Old Testament. God will continue to keep the covenant that people keep breaking. And that's what he promises you. He will keep being faithful to you. He will keep loving you with a never stopping, no matter what it costs, love, even when you keep breaking the rules. In fact, when we zoom out and look at the whole story of Exodus, we see this in the very order that God does things. God gives the people laws and rules to help them live in his presence, to transform them into a kingdom of priests that would make the world better. And he saves them from slavery in Egypt. He takes his people out of slavery and saves them through the waters of the Red Sea, like he saved Noah's family through the waters of the flood. But which one does he do first? God saves his people. He saves them from being slaves in Egypt before they ever keep one of his rules, before they ever even promise to God. God doesn't save them because they promise to follow his rules or because they do a good job doing that. He saves them first, and then after he made them his special children, then he teaches them and how to become a blessing to the whole world. And he does the same with you. God doesn't say, here are all the rules and here are the 10 commandments, and if you follow them and you're a good boy or a good girl, then I will make you my child. No. When we trust God to save us, trust him like Abraham and Moses did at some key moments, he will. And he will make you his special child before you ever keep one of his rules. And then he'll start to transform you into the person to represent him to the whole world, to be a blessing to the whole world, and to build his kingdom. You can become a child of God just by putting your trust in him. You don't have to be good or keep all the rules.
Hello Kids Church kids, it's Miss Julie and I'm glad to be a part of your lesson today. Miss Sarah has asked me to talk about how I feel that God has been a part of my life from the time I was really little, and how he has protected me, guided me, and saved me. And I can tell you as a little kid, life was kind of tough in my house. My parents didn't have much money, not much education, they fought a lot, they did end up getting divorced, and I never got angry at them. I just knew that somehow things would work out. There was just this weird sense of peace, and I would just pull away sometimes, go sit by myself, and somehow felt protected. And I guess I was, but I didn't really know how. Years later, I got to go to school and study to become a physiotherapist, which is an amazing job. I get to help people and make a big difference in their lives. And even though I can't fix everybody, I know that God is helping me to at least make their lives better. And just becoming a physiotherapist was something pretty cool in my family. God had to make a lot of things happen for me to be able to get the money to go to that education program, and for me to be able to study hard all those years and to actually get through all of that. So I know He protected me, and I know He guided me to find something so meaningful in my life. And then it was time to take my kids to church one day, and I had an amazing neighbor. Her name was Kim. She kept inviting me to church. Finally one day I said yes, and that's when I met Pastor Tom and Elaine, and I've been going to their church ever since. So I've had a lot of things happen in my life that really you can't explain how they would have happened other than God providing His protection over me, guiding me, and then saving me. Hope you guys have an awesome day. And just remember, even though you don't know it for sure, even though you can't feel it all the time, God is working in your life. Take care, guys, and see you soon.
Heavenly Father, thank you that even when we aren't faithful to you, you are faithful to us. Thank you that you save us before we are good. That if we receive you and believe in your name, we can become children of God. That we don't have to be good enough to be part of your family. Thank you for what you did, Jesus, on the cross and by rising from the dead to make us be able to be children of God. It's in your name we pray. Amen.